In January of 1814, a single sheet of paper nearly started a war. The governor of a small colony on the Red River, a man named Miles MacDonald, signed an order banning the export of one thing: not guns, not gold, dried meat. To the settlers, it looked like a rule about food supply. To the Métis and the fur traders who lived on that dried meat, it was a threat to their survival, and they treated it exactly like a declaration of war. Within 2 years, men were lying dead in the grass over it. Whole fur brigades that could not cross a frozen continent without this food watched their fuel get locked away. And this was not the first time a strip of dried meat changed the course of history. Now picture the version you know: a shiny bag by the register at the gas station, a few dollars. You tear it open with your teeth and eat it one-handed in traffic, and you never think about it again. That chewy strip of beef feels about as ordinary as food gets, but people fought over it, starved without it, carried it to the ends of the earth and beyond. Jerky was never just a snack, it was fuel. So how did a strip of dried meat feed ancient armies, cross an entire ocean, help spark a shooting war, and end up floating in orbit above your head? How did the cheapest thing at the checkout counter become one of the oldest survival tools human beings ever built? To answer that, we have to go back almost 5,000 years, high into the mountains of South America, to a place where the air is thin and the nights are cruel. Picture a herder standing in the Andes thousands of years ago. The sun is a blowtorch on his shoulders. The air is so high and thin it barely fills his lungs, and he is laying thin red strips of llama meat across cold grey stone. He is not cooking them. He is letting the mountain do the work. By day, that fierce high-altitude sun bakes the moisture out of the meat. By night, the temperature crashes below freezing, and the cold pulls out even more. Day after day, hot then frozen, until the strips turn hard and dark and nearly as light as paper. These were the Quechua, the people who would later form the beating heart of the Inca Empire. They called this dried meat charqui, a word that simply meant dried meat. And that word matters, because it is the great-great-grandfather of the word you use today. Say charqui out loud a few times and listen: jerky. Here is the part that should surprise you. They often made it with no salt at all. Down at sea level, salt was the ancient world's main weapon against rot. Up in the Andes, salt was rare and precious, so the Quechua leaned on something they had in endless supply: altitude. The thin, dry air, the brutal sun, and the deep nightly freeze did the preserving for them. It was freeze-drying, invented by hand centuries before anyone had a word for it. And the meat was not only llama, it was alpaca, and even the wild vicuña that ran across the high plateau. Whatever the herds gave, the mountain turned into something that would last for months. So why does a mountain snack matter to an empire? Because the Inca built one of the largest states in the ancient Americas, stitched together by thousands of miles of stone roads climbing through some of the harshest terrain on the planet. Armies marched those roads, messengers ran them, whole populations were moved across them. And you cannot move people through the mountains on fresh food that rots in days. You move them on charqui, lightweight, packed with protein, able to sit in a pouch for a season, and still keep a person alive. The Inca ran on it. When the harvest failed or the game disappeared, the dried meat in storage was the difference between a full stomach and starvation. For thousands of years, this stayed a mountain secret, handed down one salty bite at a time. Then, in the 1500s, strangers arrived from across the ocean in steel armor. They tasted this strange hard meat, and they wanted to know exactly how it was made. Some of the best ideas in history get invented twice. In the 1530s, Spanish conquistadors pushed into the Andes hunting for gold, and they found this too: dried meat that never seemed to spoil, carried by the very people they were conquering. The Spanish took one bite and understood the value instantly. They took the Quechua word charqui and reshaped it with their own tongue into charqui, pronounced charqui. From there, the idea traveled the way the Spanish traveled. Everywhere. It crossed oceans on their ships. It put down roots in new soil and grew into new shapes. In southern Africa, settlers dried strips of game into a spiced version they called biltong, still beloved today. Back in the Andes, charqui got chopped into hearty stews like charquicán, a dish people in Peru, Chile, Bolivia, and Argentina still eat. One mountain food, splintering into a dozen traditions across the world. But here is the strange part. While all of that was happening, an entirely separate group of people, on an entirely different continent, had already invented the very same thing on their own. Long before any European ship reached them, native peoples across North America were drying meat too. Not llama, buffalo by the millions, deer, elk. They cut it into thin strips and hung it in the sun and the smoke of low fires. The simplest method was almost comically plain. You strung the meat on ropes or draped it over racks, and you let the sun and wind do the rest for a few days until it was hard and cured. Same brilliant trick the Andes discovered, same reasoning, same result. Invented completely independently, an ocean apart. Think about what that tells you. Drying meat is not one clever culture's invention. It is something humans keep rediscovering over and over, wherever they need to survive a hard winter or a long journey. It is almost a law of nature. Where there are people and there is meat and there is no refrigerator, sooner or later there is jerky. The North American version, though, was about to take a turn. The Andes never did, because the tribes of the northern plains added one ingredient the mountain people never used. Something simple, something that sounds like it should make the food worse, not better. Fat. Pay attention to this next part, because that one change is what turned dried meat into the single most important travel food on the continent. It fueled 100 years of exploration, and it is what people would eventually kill each other over. The food was called pemmican. The name comes from the Cree word pemmican, which translates roughly to manufactured grease. That is not a flattering name, but do not let it fool you, because pemmican may be the most efficient survival food ever made by human hands. Here is how it worked. You took the dried meat, usually buffalo, and you pounded it, not sliced, pounded between stones until it broke down into a coarse powder. Then you rendered the animal's fat down into hot liquid tallow and poured it over the meat powder in roughly equal amounts. Sometimes you crushed in dried berries, Saskatoon berries or cranberries for special occasions. Then you packed the whole hot mixture into a bag sewn from the animal's own hide, often in lots of about 100 pounds, and let it cool into a dense, solid brick. That brick was a miracle of engineering. It could last for years without spoiling, and it was staggeringly rich. A single pound of pemmican carried around 3,500 calories, protein and fat compressed into a form so tough and portable you could throw it in a canoe and forget about it for a season. So the fur traders did exactly that. When European trading companies pushed deep into the North American interior chasing beaver pelts, they hit a wall. There was no time to stop and hunt during the short season when the rivers ran free of ice. The men, called voyageurs, had to paddle thousands of miles day after brutal day. They needed fuel that was light, that lasted, and that never quit. They found it in pemmican. A trader named Peter Pond is credited with bringing it into the trade in 1779, and it caught on fast. The voyageurs ate up to a full pound of it every single day. It was the gasoline of the fur trade, except you could chew it, and that made it powerful. Whole trading posts existed for one purpose: to gather pemmican and ship it out to feed the men in the far north. No pemmican, no expedition. No expedition, no fur, no money. The entire economy of a continent balanced on top of bags of dried, greased meat, controlled the pemmican, and you controlled everything. That was worth fighting for. And in January of 1814, one man tried to seize it all. Which brings us back to that sheet of paper. The place was the Red River Colony, in what is now central Canada. The man was Miles Macdonell, its governor, and on January 8, 1814, he issued the order history remembers as the Pemmican Proclamation. It banned the export of pemmican out of the colony for 1 full year. Macdonell claimed he was protecting his settlers from starvation. Maybe he even believed it, but look at who it crushed. The Métis, a nation born of indigenous and European ancestry, lived on the pemmican trade, and they supplied it to the Northwest Company, whose canoe brigades could not survive the journey west without it. To them, this was no food safety rule. It was one rival company, the Hudson's Bay Company, trying to choke off its competition by seizing the one thing everyone needed to eat. The traders and the Métis, one record notes, saw the proclamation as an open declaration of war. So they went to war. For the next 2 years, the plains simmered with raids, seizures, and burning tempers. Forts were looted, supplies were stolen and stolen back. And then, on June 19, 1816, it boiled over. A Métis party of around 60 men, led by a young leader named Cuthbert Grant, was moving pemmican across the land when they ran into the colony's new governor, Robert Semple, and a group of his men. Words turned to gunfire. When the smoke cleared, Governor Semple was dead. So were about 20 of his men. The Métis, who lost only one of their own, remembered the day as a triumph, La Victoire de la Grenouille. Roughly 21 people, killed near a little stand of trees called Seven Oaks, over dried meat. The bloodshed was so damaging that within a few years, the two great fur companies were forced to merge into one. An entire chapter of a continent's history, rewritten by a food you can grab in a bag today. But the true catastrophe was still coming. And this time, the dead would be counted not in the dozens, but in the millions. For thousands of years, the buffalo of the North American plains moved in herds so vast that early travelers swore the ground itself seemed to shake. Tens of millions of animals, a living ocean of them, stretching past the horizon. By the 1880s, they were nearly gone. Fewer than 1,000 wild buffalo were left alive. That collapse had many causes, and it was driven above all by mass hide hunting and a deliberate campaign to break the plains nations who depended on the herds. But the enormous appetite for dried meat played its part. The pemmican trade rewarded killing buffalo fast and wasteful, taking the best cuts and the hide and leaving the rest to rot on the prairie. A food built for survival had helped push the very animal it came from to the brink of extinction. That is the shadow side of this story, and it deserves to be said plainly. While the great herds were vanishing in the north, though, jerky was becoming something deeply, permanently American. Out on the cattle trails of the West, cowboys needed food that could survive weeks in the saddle under a punishing sun. Dried beef was the answer. The method was rough and ready. You cut the beef into thin strips, strung them on the ropes, and hung them along the outside of the wagon cover as the wagon rolled. 2 or 3 days of hot sun and dry wind later, the meat was cured, and you packed it into bags for the miles ahead. That is the image that stuck. The cowboy, the open range, a strip of dried beef pulled from a saddlebag at the edge of a campfire. Jerky became woven into the myth of the American frontier itself, the fuel of the people pushing west into the unknown. But the frontier did not stay open forever. The herds were nearly gone. The range was being fenced. The great trail drives were ending. Jerky, the ancient survival food, needed a new home. It found one in the last place its inventors could ever have imagined: a factory. His name was Adolph Levis, and by most measures, he was a failure. He grew up in Philadelphia and dropped out of high school during the Great Depression to earn a living. He tried to make it as a violinist. That did not work. He tried selling tobacco. That did not work either. So in the 1940s, Levis and a meatpacker partner named Joseph Cherry started selling snacks to local bars, the kind of salty stuff that makes people order another drink. Pickled pig's feet and thin dried sticks of spiced meat sold straight out of jars of vinegar right there on the bar. Those little meat sticks were the ancestor of something you have absolutely seen: the Slim Jim. For a while, they were nothing special, just a cheap, brown, salty stick for barflies. But the idea underneath was pure gold, the same idea the Quechua had landed on 5,000 years earlier. Take meat, dry it, make it last, make it portable. Levis had simply figured out how to mass produce it. In 1967, he sold the business for about $20 million, and the humble bar snack began its climb toward every gas station in America. Decades later, a wrestler named Macho Man Randy Savage would scream its slogan at a whole generation, and the Slim Jim became an icon. And Jerky, the entire category, exploded into a giant. Today, the meat snack industry pulls in around $9 billion a year. The biggest brand, Jack Link's, sells its products in more than 200,000 stores across 55 countries, cranking out over 800 million packages every single year. The dried strip of meat a mountain herder once made by hand on cold stone is now made by the hundreds of millions, wrapped in shiny plastic, sold on nearly every corner of the planet. An ancient survival trick had become a billion-dollar habit, but its strangest destination of all was still ahead, and it was not anywhere on this planet. When humans first left the Earth, they faced a ridiculous problem. What do you eat up there? The earliest astronauts squeezed sad beef paste out of aluminum tubes. In 1962, John Glenn became one of the first people ever to eat in orbit, pulling pureed beef and vegetables from a tube aboard Friendship 7. It was not exactly a feast. Space food had to be nearly perfect. No crumbs, because a single floating crumb in zero gravity can wreck equipment. Lightweight, long-lasting, no refrigeration, and ideally, enough flavor to comfort a person very, very far from home. There was already a food that checked every one of those boxes. There had been for 5,000 years. In 1996, beef jerky flew aboard the Space Shuttle Atlantis on the mission known as STS-79, bound for the Russian space station Mir. The oldest travel food on Earth had officially left it. Astronauts came to love jerky so much that in 2002, a space traveler named Mark Shuttleworth reportedly tucked a few unapproved packages of it into the pocket of his spacesuit, just to be sure he would have some up there. Think about that. The same food a herder once dried on a freezing mountain ledge, floating weightless above the world. The oldest travel food on Earth had become travel food beyond it. So look at the journey this humble strip of meat has taken. It began as a mountain secret in the Andes. It became a global trade good carried across oceans. It turned into pemmican, the fuel that powered the fur trade across a frozen continent. It grew so valuable that people went to war and died over it. It rode in the saddlebags of cowboys into the American West. It became a billion-dollar industry sold on every corner. And then it left the planet entirely. The next time you tear open a bag of it in traffic and eat it without a second thought, remember what you are holding. You are holding a thread that runs back through astronauts and cowboys and voyageurs and Inca herders. 5,000 years of human beings trying to survive the journey ahead. Jerky was never just a snack, it was fuel. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe, because there are more like it coming and you will want to be here. Drop a comment and tell me which part of the story surprised you the most. And smash that like button so more people can find it.